are. Hey, this is the fourth episode of Inside the Minds. I'm here today with Miss Caroline, or just Caroline.
Just Caroline.
I called you Miss Caroline, even though I said I wouldn't. I'm so sorry.
It's good. It's good.
And she's a therapist. So tell me about that. We're just gonna get right into it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a degree. It's a marriage and family therapy degree. So it is different saying therapist than counselor. You got that down. And I have my own private practice. So it's just me and the clients. But yeah, so marriage and family therapy is this space where we learned to approach therapy from a systemic lens, where we learned to process things with clients, not looking at just the individual and the problem, if you will, but like the bigger pieces. What are the other working parts in their life? What other systems are at play? So that's going to be the family that they're in, the community they're in, whether that be the religious community or an ethnic community, or I mean, even so much as like what part of the country you live in and how things are processed. Like we all live within these like systems that are greater than us. And that's something we consider in the therapy room.
Interesting.
Yep.
So is that different for, like you said, specifically marriage and family therapy, whereas like you kind of said counseling is different than therapy? Like
Yeah.
will counseling do that too? Is it less, I guess, like you said, systemic and it doesn't take into consideration all the parts, just kind of like the single?
I think anyone can adopt a systemic lens. I don't want to say that counselors don't, but it's not, from my understanding, because I've not been through multiple degrees. So if I'm wrong and an LPC out there is like, oh no, she's getting it wrong. But our training was more focused on that. Our training had that specific systemic focus. But I think anyone with any degree, whether it be an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor, or a licensed social worker, you can take on a systemic perspective, and some of the models, which are the things we use to kind of conduct our therapy, are very systemic. And I just have the benefit of having training that takes me all the way back, and a lot of times taking for granted those systemic pieces because I forget that not everyone thinks that way.
Right. Yeah. And so you have to kind of almost be open-minded. It's like, well, I might see it this way, but they aren't necessarily interpreting it the exact same way.
Yeah, or forgetting sometimes that I have to explain what that means.
Right.
And I did a training where they kept explaining all these systemic things and reminding people about it. And it was a 4-day training. And on day 3, it finally clicked to me that, oh, this is the reason they're explaining this is not because it's because it's not part of the therapy or counseling process for everyone.
Right.
But for a while I was like, these things seem obvious. Why aren't we learning? But other people were learning. I just didn't think I was learning because this stuff felt so intrinsic.
Right. Yeah. So what is a systemic lens to you then?
It's the lens that considers more, the bigger picture, the other things that could be affecting the person, that could be like influencing the problem, but also maybe being in the way of or the solution.
Right.
It's not just a single approach. No one person is operating removed from other people and other things and other groups.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So I think I want to backtrack for a second. You said you do have a degree. Where did you get your degree from?
I finished my degree through Converse University. So they have a master's in marriage and family therapy.
Okay, perfect. And that was where you went. Did you go straight to Converse from like high school or?
No, so that was a master's degree. I have a college degree, so I have two. I have a bachelor's in arts and a bachelor's in science.
Perfect.
From the College of Charleston.
Okay.
Psychology and religious studies were my undergraduate degrees, and I took some time off in between my undergraduate and master's, like pursued a whole nother career before going back. So that also plays into a lot of pieces.
yeah, and just like little micro, like, okay, I might get this part of me from this degree and from what I learned here versus like, specifically your master's in marriage and family therapy.
Exactly.
So why therapy? I mean, that's a hard field. I guess, I mean, maybe for me, because I couldn't see myself like helping others with their problems to that extent and being like, and there's a lot of ethics around it. It feels like a lot of pressure from the outside. Like, why did you choose that?
I think going further back than maybe even college, though I don't know when I became this person, but I'm the person who, it doesn't matter where I am, it doesn't matter if I say I'm a therapist or not, somebody is telling me about their life and their problems, and it's not something I realized that was unique to me until I was in situations with other people. My husband, for example, that is always like shocked. They're like, I can't believe they just said that. I think, yeah, no, this is normal. People just tell me this stuff.
It's just me.
Yeah, and I realized I was the person. I was the go-to person. I was the person that other people would open up to,
Right.
Which it felt normal. So when people talk about it being a hard field, which I appreciate. I appreciate that people don't look at what I'm doing and think, oh, that's easy. Anyone could do it.
Right.
I wouldn't be mad if they did. But it doesn't feel like it's so different from who I am and what I can access really naturally.
Feels natural.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I mean, I think a lot of people's fields, they choose fields based off of what feels natural to them. So like, or even what they enjoy.
Yeah.
I think if you get into a gray area of like, if you're forcing yourself to do something that you don't like or you don't feel natural in, then you kind of start to stress yourself out with your career. At least that's what I've seen from my experience and people that have kind of pursued a career that was like, okay, the opportunity presented itself and they took it even though it's not really what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty awesome that you can like feel natural in your field, especially one that, like I said, is seen as kind of hard from the outside.
Yeah. And I think that's a generational thing too. We look back, say like the boomer generation, like it was a normal thing just to get a job.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
yeah.
so I appreciate like being a millennial, if you will, that, and Gen X coming before it, but that with every generation, it's considered more normal to have a career that you actually appreciate, or versus just like cashing the paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
So.
And like you said, appreciating your job more.
Yeah.
I think when people start to actually appreciate your job, the quality of service is better. If you have somebody who doesn't like what they're doing, it's not going to be to the same level as somebody who's passionate about what they're doing. I mean, I think that's the case for even something as small as like food service.
Yeah.
Like if somebody likes people and they enjoy serving, they enjoy talking, like, and they're very personable, like I think that person is going to be a much more pleasant waitress or waiter than somebody who's just trying to, like you said, cash a paycheck.
Or even, I always think about the waiters at the restaurants when you go and you're asking them about the food and they mention some like dietary restriction or choice they've made. They're
Right.
like, well, I'm vegan, so I can't have any of this. And you're like, you're working at this restaurant where you can't eat any of the food. So you feel like, but the client service, you feel less connected to it as the restaurant patron because the server can't explain at all what half of these dishes are.
Right, exactly.
So yeah.
So I think, does that concept of kind of like, I guess, knowing and reading the room and trying to relate to whoever you're serving, I assume that applies in therapy in a lot of ways, right? And does your personal experience impact the relationship that you have with your clients or that you build with your clients?
Yeah, I think yes and no for both of those. Like both, I had personal experiences that help me relate to my clients and help me feel connected to them. But because of and we talked about this like before the episode started, but because I have this complex experience that is just my own, and I have so much about me that like you sitting across from me now, or even my best friend of 15 years isn't going to know, that I also acknowledge that each individual has their own experience that I'm not going to like understand or access or relate to, but what I can relate to is the fact that we all see things from our lens and from our perspective and informed by our experiences.
Right. So it's the beauty of perspective. Like I said before, you have this ability to, I guess, I don't want to say like put yourself in their shoes, but like understand that they are seeing things from a different lens as you, and then try and relate to them in that.
Understand that they have shoes they're wearing,
Right.
like you have shoes you're wearing.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And even though they're different shoes, they're not necessarily
You
worse.
still put them on every day.
You wear them. It's your baggage. Everybody's got it. So I think, do you ever find yourself like in your personal life being impacted by situations that you have with your clients? I mean, like I've had experience where therapists that I know kind of almost take on some of that baggage, and not like take it on in the sense of like have to deal with it 24/7. Like it's definitely to a different extent than the person that may be experiencing whatever that situation is. But I mean, it can, like, you're hearing some pretty messed up stuff sometimes because we live in a crazy world. And I think it almost makes me question, like, do you kind of feel the impact of their experience on your life and trying to help them, obviously without disclosing anything crazy, because I don't want a HIPAA violation here.
Yeah. No, we won't do any disclosing. But yes, I think I don't see it as baggage that clients are carrying, nor do I see it as something they're passing off to me. But I can appreciate that analogy in the sense that they are putting something out into the space that we are working in together. And there are times you choose to carry it more. I mean, it's the heavier moments too. The moment where a client may not feel like their life is valuable, and you are sitting here in the room with this person, and you are valuing them, but that can't be what matters. Like it can't be that I value this client, that they should continue on with their life. Like they have to find their own value. Oh. So I think it's in those moments where you realize your influence, but you know that using that to change a client's mind, if you will, is not what matters. It matters that you help them find it within themselves, not you just tell them something different.
Okay.
So I think the moments where we realize our limitations are the harder ones, and the ones where you just want to like give somebody a hug or tell them that they matter, which you can do, but that can't be the solution.
Right. It's like it can't be the crutch almost.
Yeah.
And it's I feel like you get into this it's hard to put into words. I think you almost want to let from what it seems like, I think, like I don't have experience in this, but from what it seems like from my lens is that you can't be the reliance on the client. Like the client can't be reliant on you necessarily. Mm-hmm. Maybe in the beginning it's kind of closer to that, because like if I were to go into therapy, I would think, well, this person, they are going to help my problem. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're trying to find the difference between being the person that helps their problem and being the person that helps them find a solution to their problem.
Yes, and that's something you said earlier, and I didn't say it, but I appreciated that like difference that you mentioned, like helping somebody else find their solution, right, or like work through their problem, because a lot of people come to therapy and they think you're going to help me, and part of that initial process is telling them no.
It's like I'm
actually not. You are going to help you. I'm just going to be here assisting you in that. And there's different models of therapy, again, that like use different language. Like you're going to be coaching them through it. You're going to be giving them tools, and there's all these a lot of different language that's saying the same thing, which is you are there holding their hand through the process. Like not literally holding their hand, but figuratively holding their hand through the process. And instead of just saying, here's the solution.
It's almost like there's a difference between like being a friend and being someone's therapist. It's like my dad always tells me, he's like, I'm your dad, I'm not your friend. Like we are friends, but I'm not your friend. Does that make sense? Like there's a difference between like a platonic relationship that you have with somebody versus a professional relationship that you have versus like a romantic relationship that you have. And I think it's establishing that, hey, I'm here, I'm going to help you, but I'm not going to be the reason that I'm not going to be like I said, you're not like a friend necessarily. No. I mean, you're friendly, and I mean, you are a friend in a lot of ways, I'm sure. At least I would assume.
You don't want to fill that role though. Like
right, exactly.
You want them to feel comfortable with you, your clients, but it is a fine line to walk, because they're sharing all these intimate details of their life.
Yeah, you can't help but like
you're not a friend, and you can't be and be an ethical therapist like that, because there is a difference. And my friends tell me about their problems. I'm like, oh, just stop doing this. Just do this. We've been over, but I would never do that in the therapy.
Of course,
room. That could be a 3-month process getting to whatever solution I frustratedly told my friend over the phone,
Right. Okay. And so that kind of makes me, kind of leads me into the next question here. Do you think there are times where client experiences, like if you're kind of helping them through their situation in a way, does that kind of play over into your life? And I kind of put it before we started. I said, like, you almost like, you're kind of like there, and then you give advice, and then you realize later, like, wait, I could take that advice, or I could apply this to somewhere else in my life. Yeah. Does that ever like happen? Is there like that little dilemma?
I think it ties back into the question you asked earlier, which is like how much of your experience is informing your clients. And it's more so that I hear them say something and I'm like, oh God, well, if I had that figured out, like, that would be really nice.
I know, right?
So yes, in a way, I think helping people walk through their process and walk through like what's gotten them there, or why they feel the way they do, or why they want to create this boundary if it's needed, you know, whatever we may be walking toward or through. It helps you. I wouldn't say it solves my problems like very specifically, but that headspace allows me to be more reflective in my own life and want to be the therapist in my head, which she's not nearly as helpful in my head as she would be sitting across from me if she wasn't a part of me.
You probably kind of like argue with yourself in your head. Yeah. At least I argue with myself in my head. Yeah. I'm like, well, just do this, and then the other part of me is like, well, that's not gonna work because that's just so it's like it's a little different when it comes from somebody else. I think it means, I don't want to say it means more. I think there's a value to like self-love and like talking yourself through situations, obviously without overthinking, and like kind of stressing yourself out, because I think that can cause a lot of anxiety. And yeah, so I think like having that person there to, like I said, like guide and try and almost not relate. I don't know if relate is the right word.
Listen. A lot of it is just listening.
Yeah.
Because it is amazing how much we as like a society, as individuals, walk through the world and we talk, but no one around us is listening. And that was something I became very evident to me when I did my master's program. And I actually saw some people in my master's program earlier today, and I jokingly referred to, or not even jokingly, I referred to people outside of the program as people in my real life, and they were like, your real life, we're not your real life. And in a way, no, because it feels like this beautifully like protected environment when you're around other therapists. When you speak, they really listen. And sometimes it's a little scary too, because you're like, oh no, you're listening too much. Don't interpret things like I can't say as much to you as I can to other people, because you're listening and you're remembering and you're thinking about me later. And
yeah, like it's almost like they're internalizing it more. It's
yeah, like, and they're like they're there with you in the space. And I don't know how what I connected there, but yeah, it's a different space. Like when you feel, I think I felt it with my master's program friends, especially like what it means to be sitting with a therapist, or, you know, a group of 8 therapists. You're like,
wow,
I'm being listened to. Oh no.
By like 8 people, like actually being listened to.
Yeah.
I had this encounter when I was meeting somebody. I play the drums, so that's fun. I was meeting a drummer, and we were just kind of talking, and I was like, introduced myself. I was like, hey, I'm Case. What's your name? He's like, I'm Brad. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, what's your name again? and he said, my name's Brad. And he kind of was joking, like he wasn't being rude or anything. And he was joking. He said, like, I do that all the time. He's like, sometimes I ask someone's name and then I forget to listen. And I don't know why. Like, he said it as a joke and we laughed about it. I have thought about that moment so much since then. I've internalized it,
but because it's such a good statement too. I forget to listen.
Yeah,
because we have to remind ourselves to listen to people.
It's a conscious decision to listen. It's not like you might physically hear the words coming out of somebody's mouth, but I think listening is very different than hearing. Very different. I mean, you can hear something and not be listening.
Yeah,
and I think listening is when you get into, it might be in a platonic sense of like a friend listening to a friend to help them out, or like give them advice, or it could apply to the therapy field. And I can only imagine what it's like to have 8 people listening, not just hearing.
it feels like you're exposed in a way. If it's especially if it's something that you didn't mean to get into, and all of a sudden you're having this vulnerable moment and everyone's looking at you and really listening. You're like, never mind. I'm
gonna bail out. We're not gonna talk about this.
Yeah.
So do you think, kind of going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago,
yeah,
do you think like you've experienced like lessons, unexpected lessons from clients or even other therapists? Like maybe they've had a cool perspective or an insight on something that you are experiencing, and it's kind of changed the way you think.
Yes, I think especially from my fellow therapists, but also clients. And I don't think it's so much that they teach me lessons, though I don't want to take that away because I'm sure that's happened. But they give me language for experiences I've had. And I think having language to explain something is so incredibly powerful.
I like the way you put that.
And when someone gives me the words, and you're, oh my gosh, that was so well put. And it clicks and it connects with you in a different way. Therefore, like, you can connect with the problem or the solution or whatever it is you're trying to connect with, or even just like the experience in a way that you can explain your experience to somebody else. And especially talking with a bunch of people that are therapists, everyone's always like, what I'm hearing you say is, and repeating back to you what you've said, but giving you this language that you didn't have before.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I experienced that in social life. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes I'll just randomly be thinking about something that's been on my mind for a week. And I'm like, I totally just figured out how to put it into words. Because sometimes you have emotions that you just can't put into words.
Well,
like
it's the guy that said, I forget to listen. Like, he gave you language for an experience that you've had so many times, but the second you were given that phrase for it, it stuck with you in a way it didn't before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's just those clicks, those moments where you finally get a chance from someone else's interpretation of what you said, where it's correct. Now, I think there can be incorrect interpretations of what you said.
Yeah.
It happens probably more than it happens correctly, I would argue.
Yeah.
At least it depends on who you're around and how close you are. Like, people sometimes, I think, take things the wrong way if they're not as personal or not as close with you.
It also, I think, has a lot to do with how someone presents what they're like reflecting back to you. If they say, oh, well, this is what you're feeling, and it's wrong, then you feel a lot more like attacked than if someone says, is this what I'm hearing you say? Or what I understood was, all of a sudden you feel like you have a little more space to say, no, but that part was right, that part was wrong, versus someone just
saying this is how you feel.
Yeah.
It's like I like how you put that. Again, I think it almost feels like an attack, even though it may not be intended to be that way.
Yeah.
Right, but they're like, well, it sounds to me like you're just, and they follow it up with like how they interpreted it versus like someone
without
saying,
acknowledging that it is their interpretation.
Exactly.
It's acknowledging.
Exactly. I think that applies in everything. I was watching this video on. I love that this just came back to me. Wow. I think I'm getting better at this whole podcast thing because I'm starting to relate these things back to like other things I've seen.
Yeah.
I was watching this video, ironically in Senior Project, which is what this is for.
Yeah.
Because I was bored and I saw it and I was like, interesting. It was like how to argue. That was the title of the video. It had millions of views.
Because it's like, interesting. Everyone's like, yeah, I want to win.
I want to win an argument.
But it's
but then you click on it and it was like
a video on communication.
Whoa, yes.
Yeah.
It was way more on communication versus arguing and winning an argument. And I think
that's the thing. Who wins an argument? Like,
does anyone actually win a real argument?
Yeah. It's you may have made your point, or your point might have been correct, but
they didn't take to it. If they're confident in their own beliefs, they're not going to take to it. And I think that's okay. I think that's beautiful, because without difference in opinion, you would never...
We wouldn't be sitting here.
Exactly. And you would never learn anything from someone else. There's so much that you can... We're talking about like that lens, that wide lens, systemic lens. That's where that comes from. It's from perspective and trying to intake everything at once and kind of...
While also acknowledging you can't. Like, you can't take it all in. You can't know someone's full experience, but... you can continue to consider that there's multiple like perspectives, multiple lenses that they're coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I was going with that video, and it was talking like you said, you put it perfectly. It was more about communication than arguing. The biggest thing was like how you present your argument. It can really change the course of the conversation. If you approach an argument. And I think there are some things that we should be passionate about, definitely. Like you should stick to, like, it's you. That is what makes that beauty and perspective. But there are also some things where it's like, if you don't totally know where to feel, you can go into an argument with an open lens and an open mind.
You probably should, even if you feel passionate. Like, that would be my argument for everyone, but not everyone's going to agree with me there.
Right, yeah. I think there's I respect where you're coming from, definitely.
Yeah.
I think there's a line, personally, just because I think sometimes if you are really passionate, it's not, again, I think I should be clear. When you're going into an argument about something you're passionate about, I don't think it's ever fair to discredit the other person. It's just not. However, I think it is okay to have those couple things that you're pretty firm on. I mean, whether that be anything for somebody, their religion, their religious like beliefs, their ethnic beliefs, their political views. I mean, I think, and then like I said, you get into this gray area of like when you start to discredit what the other person thinks, that's when an argument turns into an argument versus when an argument turns into just communicating and kind of bouncing ideas.
And I think when I say have an open mind, I don't always mean like be so open that you feel like you're going to change your opinion fully, but we can learn so much about like our perspective and our own argument, if you will, when we listen to what the other side is.
Right.
And
actually listen, not just hear.
Yeah. And I find it, I think some people are, I mean, I've had people in my life that are horrified by this, but I really love like quote unquote arguing with people. And I see it as more of like a discussion, because how do I really know I'm right? And I think I'm right all the time. Until I actually consider what the other side is and what the other thought processes are. So I spend more time in those discussions asking people how they got to their conclusion than actually pushing my own, because then I also feel that you can argue better. Like you can argue from their lens versus arguing from yours. And if you're looking at the argument from two different perspectives, you half the time it's like we're arguing two different things here.
Exactly. And whereas like if you relate to the person and understand where they're coming from more, you can kind of start to like actually form this difference in opinion and then talk about it. Does that play a role into therapy?
Yes.
I'm kind of realizing like I can see that connecting.
And one of my favorite things to do, and I do this in my own relationship too. I've done this with my husband, and I think it is the best way when you feel like especially when you're arguing. Half the time I want to make sure we're even arguing about the same thing. So I play this game, and I've had my clients do it too, especially like couple clients, where I say, okay, before you respond, you have to repeat back, like paraphrase or reflect back what your partner said to you first.
Yeah, to make sure there's like not a misinterpretation, I guess.
Yeah, so I would say here, so you're saying we're making sure we're not having a misinterpretation, and then I would respond. And you can even start by saying the exact same words over again, because it helps the person who said it hear what they said, so they understand how they're communicating. And even take it a step further. Say, you're saying this, what I'm understanding, this is what I understand that it means. And all of a sudden, you're having to hear yourself talk too, and hear your partner say what you said, and then have your partner respond. And then you're having to listen so much that you are able to tell them again. So it's all the things we've been talking about.
Right.
But it also slows it down enough that it will reduce. Well, it can increase tension. Everything can increase tension. But it can also reduce the tension in the room, because you're having to slow it down, because you're having to repeat. You're having to listen to what you said be repeated. And it's just cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's almost like I hate to say forcing, but like encouraging into moving into healthy conversation.
You can't force anything in therapy.
If somebody,
someone has come into the space and agreed to have you help them.
And if they take to it, then
and they can choose to not listen or not engage. But
absolutely, I think there's always a choice.
Yeah.
Always. So this is my favorite question, because I love this question, because it really embodies what this podcast is about, and it's your thinking. So how has your thinking changed, if at all? In my last episode, the guy I had on was talking about how he doesn't necessarily think his thinking's changed. It's like grown and evolved. Like, so do you think there has been like a pivotal moment where you kind of had like this, oh my goodness moment where you like changed, your thinking changed? Or do you think you were who you were, and then in learning it and going to school and studying therapy, you kind of like grew into that almost?
I think the second thing you said applies a little more, in that I am the same person. My thinking is fairly in line with where it was, though I wouldn't say there was like a pivotal moment that changed everything, but every day, every interaction, every client meeting, we have moments where we learn a little bit more about ourselves and the world around us. So over time, there's a big change, but it's not happening in a big moment. But like just sitting with you today and getting more language. I mean, I love the forgetting to listen thing, but getting more language for things. Like I am integrating that in a different way. And I think I'm integrating that already in how to explain things to clients, because there's such simplicity in that statement.
It is.
But yeah. I think there have been things I've been open to that I wasn't before. When I started the program, there was an interview question that they said, like, what group, do you have any bias against any group? And
interesting.
Yeah, and I thought, and I'd actually been thinking about that question, and it's an unfair bias to have, but it was the truth. I was like, I feel like I'm biased against white men, because sometimes I'll lean back into it and think like, well, what are they complaining about? And that's totally unfair. Anyone can have something to complain about, but that was a space I would go to in my head. And then I realized some of my favorite clients that I worked with, and not to say I really have favorites, but I was surprised by how much I enjoyed working with men. And that shocked me and surprised me. And being in the therapy space that didn't say, okay, well, you don't like working with men, so we won't make you do it. Instead, it was like, okay, well, let's see if that changes. And now I really love the space. I love working with women. I love working with men. I would work with someone that didn't identify as either. I am happy to be in a room with somebody that wants to do the work. Yeah. And that's the difference that came to me, because it doesn't matter how someone looks or presents on the outside. It in the therapy room, it's all pulling out what's in.
Yeah, right.
And if they're willing to do that, then
then
they're my ideal client.
Yeah, right. Yeah. If they show up, I think that shows initiative to want to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you think that applies to outside of the therapy room? Do you think that change, that switch, or I hate to say switch because it really wasn't a switch, like you said. You're the same person, same thinking, but those little moments, the added vocabulary, the
inspired moments of growth.
Yeah, the inspired moments of growth. Yeah. Has that played into your personal relationships, or like how you interact with people outside of a therapy setting?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it goes back to a question we had previously, which is when you're sitting in a therapy room with someone can walk through the door, and I have the benefit of being the therapist, so I'm not disclosing most things about myself. Like, you know what you see, and there'll be moments where I disclose. But someone can walk in and they can have completely different religious beliefs and political beliefs and present themselves in a way that I just would never. Like, that's not me. And I can feel like I am so different from this person. But as they open up, I realize, even if as they open up, we're still not the same at all, they are complex, and it's not this simplistic approach of I like them or I don't like them, or they're like me or they're not like me. It's that this person has this experience that while in my personal life I might not agree with what they're doing, I understand where they're coming from. So to tie this back into the question you actually asked, I try to spend more time, though I fail time and time again. When I interact with people in my personal life, I try to think, if I was in the therapy room, what would I learn about them that would allow me to have more compassion for this person, to allow me to understand them in a way that I wouldn't feel the need to judge them when I'm feeling judgmental. I think about that sometimes when I'm in traffic and I'm really mad. And I'm just like, this person is just driving slowly or too fast, or what are they? And then in my good moments, not always, I might think, oh, well, maybe they're in a rush because, or I wonder what happened to them today. And I wonder if they're going through something. Yeah. But other times I'm just sitting there behind the wheel screaming at the person in traffic because the way they're driving for whatever reason is pissing me off. But
oh my gosh, that's so funny.
yeah.
You really, that totally hit me right there.
Yeah.
Because my mom says that all the time. I mean,
But it's hard to integrate. Like in the moments where you're just like, they cut me off and I am mad, it's hard to be like,
what happened to them?
But what happened to them? Have they had a day?
Yeah.
You can't always access that person. Even as a
Yeah.
therapist, you can't always be that like best version of yourself.
Right. She always says, stop asking what's wrong or what's wrong with you, and start asking what happened to you.
Yeah.
Because I mean, life is cause and effect. I think in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
everything has an opposite reaction. There's an opportunity cost in every choice you make, and I think that impacts people's personal situations a lot. So I just love the way that's worded. That was a moment right there where I got more
Sorry,
vocabulary.
you're not going to just be able to drive. And be,
I'll never be able to drive in peace and listen to my Paramore ever again.
No, you will, because I still access that. I'm still the person that's like, just honk at them. They're,
Well, that,
my
again,
husband's like, what? And other days I'm like, they must be having a time.
Yeah, it depends on the ambiance. Of the
Yeah,
day.
and how I'm feeling. If I've had a hard day, I am not going to be the least bit understanding of anyone in traffic.
Of course not. Nobody would, especially if it's on Woodford.
Yeah, never. Actually, that's the road you put me on. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
What kind of day I've had. I'm angry.
It's always going to be, why is that
wrong.
person driving slow?
Yeah.
Everybody's in the wrong.
Yeah.
Except for me, of course, because I'm a great driver.
I don't know. Get near me on Woodruff and all bets are off.
So I want to shift a little bit here into the ethics of therapy. I talked about this 2 episodes ago, and I kind of ran you down what we talked about how like ethics are different from privacy policies, and not all privacy policies are ethical. And his opinion on the situation was that ethics come from God. Like ethics are a concept almost that we can't totally understand, but are applied. I kind of sit more on the side of like, I think that's more morals, because I think there's a difference between ethics and morals. Where does ethics play into therapy? I mean, it's a that's kind of a big question, because from my understanding, therapy is a very ethical field.
Yes.
There's a lot of boundaries that you can't cross.
Yeah, and they are legislated kind of at that like HIPAA level. They're legislated even at this, and I don't know if even legislated is the correct term there, but they're put into place at HIPAA, which is more of a national thing.
Right.
And that at the state level, there's certain things we have to follow as a marriage and family therapist, MFT, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, have like ethics we have to follow.
Lots of different little like.
And I would say what I then push myself to follow becomes even more strict. It's based off of all that, but yes, based off personally what I feel comfortable with. Just because somebody says I can do something, or the law says, or HIPAA says, or the state says, or AAMFT says I can do something, doesn't mean it's going to sit right with me. So I operate within the boundaries that have been set for me, but also understanding that I can set stricter boundaries if that's what's comfortable for me. I also, because you said this and because you connected it to a previous episode, I think it's interesting. I am not religious. I would very much classify myself as an atheist. So I think I am the opposite, and then I don't think like ethics and morals come from a higher power. I think they can, and for some people that's where they originate. But I think they very much come from within, and like a desire to be good and do good. And I think, again, that desire to be good and do good can come from within. It can come from a higher power. It can come from within via a higher power.
Right, yeah.
But, I think it's, there is so much, I don't want to say it's my personal comfort level, but this desire I have to help and to do good and to do no harm, which is also requirements to some extent, play into the ethics of therapy and what I feel okay doing and saying and creating as policies for my clients.
Right.
At the end of the day, one of the things that I focus on the most is making sure I've explained something to a client, and in which case I feel better enforcing it. A cancellation policy, for example. I have a 24-hour cancellation policy. So if a client does not cancel within 24 hours, they're charged for the full session fee. There's reasons for that. It's my time, it's other clients' time, it's helping a client learn to prioritize the therapy they have scheduled if they're unable to do so. But there's always that part of you that feels guilty for policies like that you put in place, and you think, should they be paying me if they're not even here, if I'm not helping? And but I've discussed that. I've told them that. We've had this conversation. I've gone over. I'm not telling them anything new or different. And there's always spaces that I'm willing to, if someone calls me and they're throwing up, I'm not like, oh, well, I'm charging you.
Well, yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to see you. That's fine.
Yeah, that's different. That's different. I think it's cool that you talked about the difference between, like, you said, like, ethics that are being legislated at different levels.
Prescribed morals.
Yeah. Like, almost like rules, I guess.
I think they can be, and they can be prescribed. Like, the government can prescribe morals, religion can prescribe morals.
Right.
Like,
it's individual.
Yeah. And you can also have your own set that you're working through. They can come from different places. And I think the ones we hold strongest to, at least from my perspective, are the ones that come from within and come from a desire to do the right thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. It does.
Yeah.
I think it's cool that I say that a lot. I think it's cool. I think that.
Well,
I think
I'm glad
this,
I'm cool.
I think.
I'm glad it's cool.
I'm always saying I think. I don't. That's like my filler when I'm on camera.
Yeah, we all have them.
Oh, of course we do. It's interesting that you also talked about your personal ethics. It doesn't just come, like I said, rules. It doesn't just come from somebody who's legislating you or like telling you what to do. It's like, even though I may be able to do this, it doesn't mean that I'm going to. Even though it might be legal for me to do this, doesn't mean I'm going to. Because I think you get into this area where if you start constantly going off of a rule book, it will seem less personal.
Yeah, and it also, for me, I think if all I'm doing is following somebody else's rules or prescriptions, that you start to question how much of that actually feels right for you. And I think it's important to revisit what rules are set and why they're set, and to understand that, and understand, especially in the therapy realm, why they're set for clients, like privacy under HIPAA and protecting client confidentiality, that kind of stuff. I understand. That makes sense.
Of course, yeah.
But it's important to consider that sometimes, and not just accept it, but to really integrate the understanding behind that rule into your thinking, and into how you practice as a clinician. Right.
So have you ever had like an ethical dilemma, I guess? Like a moment where something kind of like caught you off guard, or I guess, like I said, I think I put it well the first time, just an ethical dilemma.
Yeah, I think ethical dilemmas, I've been faced with them myself, but also I've working in spaces where you're able to collaborate with other therapists or have supervision with other therapists who are still being supervised like you are. You can kind of talk through those. And so I've learned a lot from other people's experiences as well. And I think the ethical dilemmas that I see come up a lot are ones where we have to consider ourselves as well as the clients. And I had an interesting discussion with a fellow therapist and our supervisor. We're under supervision this week, talking about when to like discontinue like a relationship with a client, like when you are not able to serve that client based on their needs for whatever reason. Maybe it's that you're having a personal block, or something's coming up for you with that client that it feels unfair for you to keep working with them, or you don't have the time, or whatever issue they're dealing with or bringing into therapy is not something that you are qualified, or you don't feel qualified, or you do not have the capacity to handle. And discontinuing that relationship, knowing that it could be hurtful to somebody else, but knowing that you have to put your capacity and your needs ahead of the clients to then serve your clients. And it's this weird balance, because you are in the room serving other people, but you have to come as a full version of yourself to be able to do that.
Exactly.
So that is what I would say. It feels like more of an ethical dilemma because of the complexity of it. There's no clear rule like, oh, well, you have to feel 80% and then you can help your client there. And,
Yeah,
and also how we even get to the 80%, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that,
Wow.
I hope that makes sense.
That was not the answer I was expecting. Like
Okay.
in a good way. That's a concept I didn't even think about.
Yeah,
Like you, in order to help somebody else, like you got to help yourself. You have to make sure you're doing good before you can try and make sure someone else is doing good.
Yeah, and it's something I think, especially in the mental health field, we're faced with a lot because you're seen as a servant, and I mean in a good way. Like you're seen as somebody who's serving others,
Right.
And therefore, like, why are you charging this much, or why aren't you just seeing X amount of people a week? Like you have time, you could see more people, you could help me more people, you could charge less. And there's a lot of commentary on like that if you allowed it to would make you feel like a selfish person. But you have to know that like you have to have a full life. You have to have your mental health at a certain level first, and so I think it's systemic, right? It's a larger, it's the world questioning this profession in a larger way, but I think it creates a sense of it helps build you up and help you to answer that question for yourself, and therefore then to answer it to others when they
need help with it,
Yeah.
or help figuring it out.
Yeah.
Wow, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a self-worth thing.
It is.
I think
yeah,
we all need to work on
just as important as others' worth. You know, it really is. And from the sounds of it, it comes first. I mean, I think
I'm really bad at putting it first. I'm really good at not valuing or not prioritizing, I guess is the best term. Not prioritizing my own needs and wanting to do everything for everyone else.
and
then wearing myself too thin, and to add a whole nother personal layer onto this interview that maybe I'll be the only one. I'm pregnant right now. So
Right.
I have to eat meals at regular times, and like this baby inside of me has made me feel like selfish in ways. I'm like, I need sleep. But I'm telling myself it's like, oh, it's because of the baby. If the baby wasn't here, I could just stay up and finish this later, or I wouldn't need to take this break and drink more water, but that's helping me still prioritize this body and this self, even though it's because of this other person. But yeah, I'm not good at it, and I want to be intentional about it because I know best version of Caroline is a best version of the therapist.
Of the therapist. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So you've kind of already answered this question in a lot of ways. Like, I think maybe not necessarily directly answered it, but I could probably see where you sit on it, or kind of how you would do this.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you stay open-minded in approaching a situation with a client? So, like you said, you're an atheist, and that's like, but if you have a client who's super religious, Catholic, Christian, Mormon, something different, Muslim, Hindu, anything.
Yeah.
Like, how do you obviously can't just discredit their opinion, you know?
No.
That's the worst. From what I would assume, that's one of the worst things you could do in the room for sure.
Yeah.
How do you maintain an open mind?
I don't think it's my job to be. I guess I don't think it's my job to accept their religion or their stance, whether it be a political stance, a religious stance, an ethical stance. I mean, unless I feel like they're really hurting somebody else with their stance, I'm not going to question it. I think it is my job to appreciate what their religion, what their perspective, what has done for them and is able to do. It's a tool. I think especially religion, it can be a tool for someone to... It can help them. They can feel more connected. They can connect both to a spiritual piece, or they can connect within the church community. If we're talking about Christians, and when I'm thinking about solving problems, and a lot of times I think solutions come from connecting with others and feeling supported by others. So I like it when people have
a difference in opinion.
Yeah, and views that are different than my own, because it's my job to help them see the strengths and resources they have in their lives, not to prescribe it for them.
I see. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I like when people walk in with something that's different from me. And I also know that because I am not religious, that there is I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, though. So I went to church with my friends always growing up, and I have a religious studies degree. Like I
Right,
to some extent understand religion.
Yeah.
But I might not understand a specific perspective. So I go to the people I know who are open-minded, that are religious, that I can say, hey, I had this client come in with this complaint or this issue or whatever it may be. How can I approach this without challenging their religious belief? Or why would somebody with this religious belief be having this experience or be setting this boundary for themselves? So not making the client explain it to me either. I think it's very important in the therapy room for us as therapists, when we feel like we're a little out of our league, to educate ourselves and go to experts and professionals and colleagues around us to help understand a situation that may have holes for us.
Right, exactly.
So
it's like you don't have to do it all alone. Like, you have resources where you can that can help you relate to somebody, or I don't really even know if that's the right word, relate. I think
understand. Yeah, and it doesn't matter if I even fully understand, but to understand enough that I am able to help them in the process.
Right.
And I don't think you need a therapist that aligns with you on any whether it be identification, aligns with you in how you identify, or aligns with you in religion. I think that can make people feel more comfortable, and I think it's totally fine if a client has a preference for a therapist that aligns with them more. But I don't think it's a requirement, because I believe a good therapist, and I believe there are a lot of good therapists out there, a good therapist can see past their identity and their beliefs
and their difference in opinion
to help clients.
Yeah.
And if that's kind of back to the ethical thing, and when you hit that point where you feel like you can't see past it, you help that client find a therapist that can.
Who can. Right. So that,
because there's always going to be something you can't work past, or
sure.
you can't see past.
Absolutely.
And that is okay, because we're people. We are not just these like therapist servants, like I was saying. We are people who have needs as well.
Are just as complex as everybody else. We
Yes.
were talking about Sonder is what that's called.
Yeah.
I remembered that time.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Wow. So where do you see yourself going from here?
Well, I mean, more into the therapy realm. I was talking with some like colleagues today, and I say colleagues, they were my people in my master's program, about what next steps are. I really see myself diving into grief more as a place to help people.
Interesting. Okay.
I have a little bit of kind of a I don't want to say a grief perspective in my practice. Like I want to focus on perinatal loss, but like I see myself, I guess, having more of a niche and where I'm helping clients in certain spaces in their lives more than just helping everyone. I do want to help everyone.
Right.
But I think, I don't know, I see myself getting into the weeds a little more in the grief realm. And when I say grief, I don't mean just the person that lost a parent or a sibling or a child. I mean like grief and change, like when you have to grieve. I mean, what's coming up for you? Like when there will be a sense of grief that you feel when you graduate from high school and you have change in your life.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that is such it's a hard place, but it's such a place of change. And I want that language to be, I want it to be okay to say like, I'm grieving X, Y, Z, whatever it be, and that not have to be grieving a loss of a person or, I think you can grieve a lot of things. And I want that to be more, I want that to be
in the realm of what you're handling.
Yes. And also like language that people feel comfortable using. I want them to say like, and I don't want grief to have to be something that exists on its own. I think you can grieve something and celebrate it all at the same time too. Not that you always have to.
Yeah. But graduation's a good example of that.
A life change. Yeah. And that I see myself getting deeper into that realm, but also just learning and continuing to grow and educate myself. And I'm sure if I listen back to this podcast, I'm going to say, oh, why did I say that? That's not what I meant. And learning about how I present and who I am with clients. There's so much room for me to grow.
Yeah. Room for all of us to grow.
Yep.
I love it.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that was great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I like this.
This was good. I love it. It was awesome. I appreciate you being here. Thank you guys if you're still here watching. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope you took something away from this today. So yeah, and you as well. Hope you took away just as the audience.
I took something away, and I hope the same.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.